The bustling international airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, families saying tearful goodbyes, and announcements echoing over loudspeakers. Among the crowd stood Maya Thompson, a confident and poised woman in her early 30s. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that screamed professionalism, she adjusted the strap of her leather tote bag as she approached the check-in counter. Her passport was already in hand, its worn edges a testament to her frequent travels for work. Maya had been traveling internationally since she started her career as a corporate lawyer 7 years ago. She knew the drill: hand over your ticket and passport, answer a few routine questions, and you're on your way. But today felt different. As soon as the airline agent took her passport, there was a noticeable pause. The agent's smile faltered slightly as she flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing ever so subtly. "Is everything okay?" Maya asked politely, sensing something was off. Her voice carried just enough warmth to mask the flicker of unease creeping into her chest. "Just a moment, please," the agent replied without looking up. She picked up the phone beside her and whispered urgently into it, glancing at Maya briefly before turning away. A knot formed in Maya's stomach. What could possibly be wrong? She'd used this passport dozens of times before without issue. It wasn't expired, and all the information matched her boarding pass perfectly. Within moments, a tall man in a dark uniform appeared beside the counter. His presence commanded attention, though not in a comforting way. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels and asked Maya to step aside for a private conversation. Confused but compliant, Maya followed him a few feet away from the growing line of impatient passengers. "I need to see your identification," he said sternly, holding out his hand. Maya handed over her passport again, watching as he examined it closely under the fluorescent lights. His brow furrowed as if searching for something amiss. "This doesn't look right," he muttered, flipping it open and closed repeatedly. "Are you sure this belongs to you?" Maya blinked, caught off guard by the accusation. "Of course it does," she responded firmly, her tone steady despite the rising tension. "I've traveled internationally multiple times with this exact document. There must be some kind of mistake." But Officer Daniels didn't seem convinced. Instead, he gestured toward a nearby security checkpoint. "We'll need to verify this further," he said, his voice clipped. Passengers waiting in line began to take notice now, craning their necks to see what was happening. Some whispered among themselves while others stared openly, curiosity etched across their faces. As Maya walked toward the designated area, escorted by the officer, she couldn't help but feel a wave of frustration washing over her. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her identity or assumed she didn't belong somewhere simply because of the color of her skin. Each time, it stung a little more, chipping away at her patience and dignity. Yet here she was again, being singled out in front of strangers, forced to defend herself against baseless accusations. When they reached the security station, Officer Daniels motioned for her to wait. Another officer joined them, this one younger and less experienced looking. Together, they huddled around the passport, discussing it in low tones. Maya crossed her arms tightly over her chest, trying to appear calm even as her heart raced. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of judgmental stares from passers-by only made it worse. She glanced around, hoping someone might recognize the absurdity of the situation. Surely, someone would speak up. But most people simply looked away, unwilling to get involved. For now, Maya was alone in this, a black woman facing yet another battle against a system that seemed determined to doubt her at every turn. Little did she know, this encounter was far from over, and what happened next would leave everyone speechless. The tension in the air was palpable as Maya stood under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights at the security checkpoint. Officer Daniels, his expression unreadable but firm, continued to scrutinize her passport as if it were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. The younger officer by his side nodded along silently, clearly deferring to the more experienced man. Passengers passing by slowed their pace, some craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. A few even stopped altogether, pretending to tie shoelaces or check their phones while secretly observing the unfolding scene. "This doesn't match up," Officer Daniels finally said, breaking the silence. His voice carried an edge of accusation that made Maya's stomach churn. "Are you sure this is your passport? Because we're seeing some irregularities here." Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed despite the rising frustration bubbling inside her. "I'm absolutely sure," she replied, her tone calm but laced with steel. "That's my name, my picture, and my information. I've used this passport countless times without any issues. Can you tell me exactly what's wrong with it?" Officer Daniels hesitated for a moment before responding. "We can't disclose specifics right now," he said, avoiding direct eye contact. "But there have been reports of fake documents being used recently, and yours has raised red flags in our system." Red flags? Maya's mind raced. She had done nothing wrong. This was her legal, valid passport issued by the government. How could they possibly think it was fake? She felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. Was this really about her passport, or was it something else entirely? Before she could respond, Officer Daniels stepped closer, his posture stiffening. "If you don't cooperate fully, we may have no choice but to place you under arrest," he warned, his voice low but deliberate. The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. Arrested? For carrying her own passport? It seemed surreal, almost laughable, if it weren't so terrifying. Her heart pounded in her chest as adrenaline coursed through her veins. She glanced around, hoping someone would step in, say something, anything, to acknowledge how absurd this situation was. But the onlookers remained silent, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. No one wanted to intervene, not when the authority figure in the room was speaking with such certainty. Maya clenched her fists briefly before letting them relax at her sides. She knew losing her temper wouldn't help. She needed to stay focused and rational. "Look," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I understand you're just doing your job. But this is ridiculous. I'm not lying, and I haven't done anything wrong. If there's truly an issue with my passport, then let's sort it out properly." Her attempted reason seemed to fall on deaf ears. Officer Daniels exchanged a glance with his colleague, who shrugged slightly. "We'll need to take this matter to the next level," Daniels announced, gesturing toward a nearby holding area. "Come with us, please." As Maya followed them, her thoughts raced. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was humiliating. Being singled out in front of dozens of strangers, accused of something she hadn't done, brought back memories of other times she'd faced similar treatment. Whether it was being followed in stores, questioned excessively during routine traffic stops, or overlooked in professional settings, these experiences weighed heavily on her. And now, here she was again, fighting against assumptions rooted in prejudice. When they reached the small holding room, a cramped space with bland white walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs, Maya sat down, trying to steady her breathing. The two officers closed the door behind them, sealing her off from the rest of the bustling airport. Outside, life went on as usual. Families boarded planes, announcements blared over speakers, and travelers rushed to their gates. Inside, however, time seemed to slow to a crawl. "You'll need to answer some questions," Officer Daniels said, pulling out a clipboard and pen. His tone was clinical, detached, as though he were interrogating a suspect rather than a law-abiding citizen. "Let's start with your full name, date of birth, and current address." Maya complied, reciting the details slowly and clearly. With each question, she grew more aware of how absurd the situation was. These were basic facts anyone could confirm with a quick database search. Why were they wasting everyone's time, and hers, with this drawn-out process? As the interrogation continued, Maya noticed subtle changes in the officer's demeanor. They weren't outright hostile, but there was an underlying skepticism that grated on her nerves. Every pause between questions felt loaded, every glance exchanged between them heavy with unspoken judgment. It was as if they expected her to slip up, to reveal. The small holding room felt suffocating, its sterile white walls closing in on Maya as the minutes ticked by. The two officers sat across from her, their expressions unreadable but undeniably skeptical. Officer Daniels flipped through his notes, occasionally glancing at her passport as if it might suddenly reveal some hidden flaw. His younger colleague fidgeted with his pen, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. "So," Daniels began, leaning back in his chair, "you're telling us this is your legitimate passport, correct?" His tone was measured, but there was an undertone of challenge that made Maya's jaw tighten. "Yes," she replied firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's my legal document, issued by the government. I've used it for years without any problems. If there's an issue, it's not with me. It's with whatever system flagged it." Daniels raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by her confidence. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath before launching into another round of questions. This time, they weren't just asking for basic details. They wanted to know where she worked, who her employer was, and even the nature of her trip to London. Each question felt more invasive than the last, prying into aspects of her life that had nothing to do with her passport. Maya answered patiently, reciting facts about her job, her company, and the business conference she was scheduled to attend. But with every response, she could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. It wasn't enough that she was being detained. They seemed determined to make her prove her entire existence. As the interrogation dragged on, Maya's frustration simmered just beneath the surface. She clenched her hands tightly in her lap, willing herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't help. She needed to think strategically. These officers were treating her like a criminal, but she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. There had to be a way to turn this around. Her mind raced as she considered her options. Should she call her boss, reach out to a lawyer, or should she try reasoning with them again? None of those seemed like immediate solutions. Then, an idea struck her, one that might force them to take her seriously. Slowly, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Daniels asked sharply, leaning forward in his chair. "I'm calling my office," Maya said smoothly, holding up the phone. "They can confirm everything I've told you about my identity and travel plans." For a moment, Daniels hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. Go ahead." But Maya didn't dial her office right away. Instead, she opened her social media app and started typing. Her fingers flew across the screen as she composed a short message explaining what was happening. Before hitting send, she switched to her camera and turned on live streaming. The red recording icon blinked on her screen as she angled the phone toward the officers. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady, but loud enough to capture their attention. "I'd like to inform you that I'm now live streaming this interaction. Thousands of people are watching online, and I'm documenting everything that's happening here today." Both officers froze, their eyes widening in shock. Daniel straightened up in his seat, his earlier bravado faltering. "You can't do that," he stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can," Maya replied coolly. "I have every right to record this encounter, especially since I'm being accused of something I didn't do. My followers deserve to know what's going on." Within seconds, comments began flooding the live stream. Viewers expressed outrage, disbelief, and support for Maya. Some urged her to stand her ground, while others vowed to report the incident to airport authorities and civil rights organizations. The sheer volume of engagement was staggering. Within minutes, hundreds of people were tuning in, and the numbers kept climbing. Daniels and his colleague exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unset being recorded. Their earlier confidence waned as they realized the spotlight was no longer just on Maya. It was on them too. For the first time since the ordeal began, Maya felt a flicker of control returning to her grasp. "This is unnecessary," Daniels muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "We're just trying to ensure security protocols are followed. And I'm just trying to catch a flight." Maya shot back, her voice firm but controlled. If there's truly an issue with my passport, then let's resolve it quickly and move on. But dragging this out isn't helping anyone. The younger officer glanced at his watch, then whispered something to Daniels. Whatever he said seemed to rattle the older man further. He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face before standing up abruptly. "We'll need to verify your information with our superiors," he announced, avoiding eye contact with Maya. "Wait here." With that, both officers exited the room, leaving Maya alone once again. As the door clicked shut behind them, she exhaled deeply, letting the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. The live stream continued running, and viewers bombarded her with messages of encouragement. "You're doing great," one comment read. "Stay strong, Maya," wrote another. Though she still didn't know how this nightmare would end, Maya felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. And judging by the growing number of people watching her stream, she wasn't alone in this fight. As the live stream continued, Maya's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, comments pouring in from viewers expressing outrage, support, and admiration for her composure. The room, though still small and stifling, no longer felt as isolating. Knowing that thousands of people were watching gave her a strange sense of solidarity, like an invisible crowd standing beside her, cheering her on. Outside the holding room, murmurs of activity grew louder. Passengers passing by had begun to notice the commotion. Some slowed their pace, curiosity piqued by the sight of uniformed officers pacing near the security checkpoint. Others stopped entirely, whispering among themselves about what might be happening. Among them was Margaret, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun and glasses perched delicately on her nose. She had been sitting just a few rows away from Maya during check-in and had witnessed the initial confrontation. Margaret wasn't one to stay silent when something felt wrong. A retired judge with decades of experience in fairness and justice, she prided herself on speaking up when others couldn't or wouldn't. When she saw Maya being led away earlier, something about the situation struck her as deeply unfair. Now, seeing the growing crowd and overhearing snippets of conversation, she decided it was time to act. Pushing her way through the gathering spectators, Margaret approached the security checkpoint, where Officer Daniels and his colleagues stood huddled together, clearly flustered. "Excuse me," she said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. Both officers turned to face her, startled by the interruption. "I'd like to know what's going on here," Margaret continued, her tone polite but unyielding. "That young woman you took into that room, what exactly is she accused of?" Officer Daniels frowned, taken aback by the question. "Ma'am, this is a private matter involving airport security protocols. We can't discuss it with you." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Private matter? From where I'm standing, it looks like you're detaining a passenger without clear cause. And if I'm not mistaken, there are laws against that sort of thing." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from the onlookers. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for someone to challenge him so directly. "With all due respect, ma'am, we're following procedure," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Procedure," Margaret repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Let me tell you something about procedure. I spent 30 years presiding over courtrooms ensuring that people were treated fairly under the law. If your procedure involves harassing innocent travelers because of how they look, then perhaps it's time to rethink those procedures." The younger officer glanced nervously at Daniels, unsure how to respond. Margaret pressed on, undeterred. "I've seen that woman before. She travels frequently. I've sat near her on flights multiple times. She's professional, courteous, and certainly not someone who would carry fraudulent documents. So unless you have concrete evidence to support your claims, I suggest you let her go." Daniels hesitated, visibly torn between maintaining his authority and addressing the growing public scrutiny. Margaret seized the moment, pulling out her own phone. If you won't listen to reason, maybe you'll listen to the hundreds of people online who are already watching this unfold. Because trust me, this isn't staying quiet. At that exact moment, another passenger, a college student with bright pink hair and a backpack slung over one shoulder, stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Yeah, and we're recording everything too," she added, gesturing to the small group of onlookers filming the scene. This kind of treatment is unacceptable, and everyone needs to see it. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were losing control of the narrative. What had started as a routine inquiry was spiraling into a full-blown public relations disaster. Passengers began chanting softly, urging the officers to release Maya. Someone even suggested contacting the media, which only added to the mounting pressure. Back in the holding room, Maya could hear the commotion outside. Though muffled, the voices carried a sense of hope, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Her heart swelled with gratitude for Margaret and the others who had chosen to stand up for her. It was moments like these that reminded her of humanity's capacity for kindness, even in the face of systemic injustice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Officer Daniels stepped inside, looking more disheveled than before. He avoided making eye contact with Maya as he spoke. "We're reviewing your case further," he muttered, his usual confidence. The commotion outside the holding room reached a fever pitch, with Margaret leading the charge. Her commanding presence and sharp words had drawn a small crowd of passengers who were now filming the scene on their phones, live streaming it to social media platforms. The college student with pink hair stood beside her, holding up a sign she'd hastily scribbled on a notebook. "Racial profiling has no place in airports." Others joined in, chanting slogans like, "Let her go," and "Fair treatment for all." Inside the holding room, Maya could hear every word. Though muffled by the thin walls, the voices carried determination and anger. Anger not just for her sake, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race or appearance. It was a powerful reminder that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger. Maya's phone buzzed nonstop as thousands of viewers continued watching her live stream. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. Some offered words of encouragement. "You're so brave. We're rooting for you." Others expressed outrage. "This is disgusting. Why is she being targeted? They wouldn't treat a white person this way." The sheer volume of support buoyed Maya's spirits. She knew the world was watching and judging. The officers couldn't ignore the growing backlash forever. Every second that passed felt like another nail in the coffin of their flimsy case against her. Outside, Margaret wasn't finished yet. She turned to address the growing audience of onlookers. "Does anyone here know this young woman?" she asked loudly, her voice cutting through the noise. Several passengers nodded vigorously. "She's always polite and professional." One man chimed in. "I've seen her on flights before. She's no criminal." Another woman added, "I travel often, and I'd never seen anything like this happen to someone without cause. This is wrong." Margaret folded her arms across her chest, turning back to the officers. "You see, people recognize her. They vouch for her. So why are you still wasting everyone's time?" Officer Daniels looked increasingly uncomfortable. His earlier bravado had evaporated under the weight of public scrutiny. Reporters began arriving at the terminal, alerted by the viral nature of Maya's live stream. Camera crews set up tripods while journalists shoved microphones toward the officers, demanding answers. "What evidence do you have against this passenger?" One reporter asked sharply. "Is it true she's being racially profiled?" Another pressed. Daniels stammered, clearly unprepared for the media spotlight. He glanced around nervously, searching for backup, but found none. Even his younger colleagues seemed eager to distance himself from the situation. Passengers continued recording, ensuring the officers' every move was documented. Back inside the holding room, Maya decided to take matters into her own hands. Still streaming live, she addressed her audience directly. "Thank you all for your support," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. What's happening right now shouldn't happen to anyone. It's dehumanizing and unjust. But we can't let fear or intimidation silence us. That's how change happens. Her words resonated deeply with her viewers. Comments flooded in praising her courage and resilience. Someone even started a hashtag. Hashtag Stand with Maya. Within minutes, it began trending online, drawing attention from activists, influencers, and news outlets worldwide. Meanwhile, airport officials arrived on the scene, visibly alarmed by the chaos unfolding in their terminal. A senior manager approached Officer Daniels, whispering urgently in his ear. Whatever he said made Daniels pale slightly. The manager then turned to Margaret and the crowd. "Please, give us a moment to resolve this internally," he pleaded, his tone conciliatory. "We're bringing in a higher authority to review the matter." Margaret crossed her arms, unmoved. "It's about time," she replied curtly. "But don't think this ends here. This kind of behavior has consequences." As the senior manager disappeared into the holding room, Maya braced herself for what came next. Moments later, he reappeared with an immigration official, a tall, bespectacled man carrying a tablet. He introduced himself as Mr. Harris and assured everyone that he would personally verify Maya's documents. While Harris worked, the tension in the air remained thick. Passengers refused to disperse, determined to see justice served. Reporters fired questions at anyone willing to speak, amplifying the pressure on the airport staff. Social media buzzed with updates, opinions, and calls for accountability. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Harris looked up from his tablet. Their appears. As Maya emerged from the holding room, the applause and cheers of passengers echoed through the terminal like a wave of collective triumph. Strangers surrounded her, their faces filled with admiration and relief. Some offered hugs, while others simply shook her hand, thanking her for standing her ground. Reporters jostled for position, shoving microphones in her direction, eager to capture her reaction. "I'm just glad this is finally resolved," Maya said into the nearest microphone, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "But let's be clear, this never should have happened in the first place." Her words resonated deeply, not only with those present, but also with the thousands watching online. The live stream had reached millions by now, sparking outrage and conversations across social media platforms. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Maya, hashtag Travel While Black, and hashtag Indracial Profiling trended worldwide, drawing attention from activists, celebrities, and even politicians. Margaret stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "You handled this beautifully," she said warmly. "But don't think for a second that this ends here. This kind of behavior can't go unchecked." Maya nodded, grateful for Margaret's unwavering support. "You're right," she replied softly. "This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been treated unfairly because of how they look or where they come from. We need to hold people accountable so no one else has to go through what I did today." The senior airport manager approached cautiously, his expression a mix of embarrassment and desperation. "Miss Thompson, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience you experienced," he began, his tone overly formal. "This was an unfortunate error, and we're taking immediate steps to ensure it doesn't happen again." Maya raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the generic apology. "An error," she repeated, her voice firm. "This wasn't just some clerical mistake, it was racial profiling. If my name or appearance were different, none of this would have happened. You owe it to your passengers to address the systemic issues at play here." The manager hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her directness. He glanced at the reporters surrounding them, realizing there was no way to downplay the situation any longer. "We'll launch a full investigation into this matter," he promised, though his words sounded hollow even to himself. "And we'll review our procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future." Passengers nearby muttered under their breath, skeptical of his promises. One woman called out, "Investigations aren't enough. You need real change, better training, accountability, and transparency. The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices amplifying Maya's message. It was clear that this incident had struck a nerve, not just with those directly involved, but with anyone who had ever felt marginalized or mistreated in public spaces. For many, Maya's experience was a reflection of their own struggles, and they weren't willing to let it slide. Reporters continued firing questions, each one more pointed than the last. "Do you believe this was a case of racial profiling?" One asked Maya. "How do you plan to address systemic bias within your organization?" Another directed at the airport manager. Maya took a deep breath before responding. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of discrimination that Black travelers face every day. Whether it's being questioned excessively, detained without cause, or treated as guilty until proven innocent, these experiences are far too common. And they need to stop. Her words struck a chord, earning nods of approval from the crowd. Even some of the officers standing nearby seemed uneasy, their earlier confidence replaced by discomfort. They knew the spotlight was on them now, and it wouldn't fade anytime soon. As the scene unfolded, news outlets broadcast live updates, amplifying the story globally. Influencers and civil rights advocates weighed in, calling for reforms and accountability. Calls flooded into the airport's customer service lines, demanding answers and action. Online petitions urging investigations into racial profiling in airports gained tens of thousands of signatures within hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maya was allowed to leave the security checkpoint area. Passengers parted to let her pass, clapping and cheering as she made her way toward her gate. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief that the ordeal was over, gratitude for the support she'd received, and anger at the injustice she'd endured. When she reached her boarding gate, the entire plane erupted in applause. Travelers waiting to board stood up, clapping rhythmically as if welcoming a hero. Some shouted words of encouragement. "You showed them. We're proud of you." The flight to London was quiet compared to the chaos Maya had endured at the airport, but her mind was anything but calm. As the plane soared above the clouds, she stared out the window, replaying the day's events in her head. The accusations, the live stream, the crowd of strangers rallying behind her. It all felt surreal, like a movie script she hadn't signed up for. But deep down, she knew this moment carried weight far beyond her personal experience. By the time she landed in London, news of her ordeal had spread even further. Journalists greeted her at baggage claim, microphones thrust forward as cameras flashed. "Miss Thompson, how do you feel about the global response to your case?" one reporter asked. Another chimed in. "Do you plan to take legal action against the airport?" Maya paused, adjusting the strap of her tote bag before answering. "I'm overwhelmed by the support I've received," she began, her voice steady but warm. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every traveler who has faced discrimination because of their race or appearance. That's why I'm committed to using my platform to push for real change." Her words resonated deeply, not only with those present, but also with viewers tuning in from around the world. Social media buzzed with updates on her story, and hashtags like #JusticeForMaya continued trending. Celebrities tweeted messages of solidarity, while civil rights organizations reached out to offer their support. It was clear that Maya's experience had struck a nerve, a collective frustration over systemic bias that people were finally ready to confront. Over the next few days, Maya found herself at the center of a growing movement. She appeared on international news programs, sharing her story with millions of viewers. Each interview was an opportunity to highlight the broader issue of racial profiling in airports and beyond. "This isn't just about one bad day," she emphasized during a live segment. "It's about dismantling the systems that allow these injustices to happen in the first place." Her advocacy quickly gained traction. Activists organized protests outside major airports, demanding accountability and reform. Online petitions calling for investigations into discriminatory practices amassed hundreds of thousands of signatures. Lawmakers began discussing potential legislation to address racial bias in travel security protocols. Even corporations started reviewing their diversity training programs, inspired by Maya's courage to speak out. Back home, Maya partnered with civil rights organizations to launch a campaign aimed at raising awareness and driving policy changes. She gave speeches at conferences, wrote op-eds for prominent newspapers, and collaborated with influencers to amplify marginalized voices. Her message was simple yet powerful. No one should have to prove their worth or innocence based on the color of their skin. Despite the overwhelming support, Maya faced challenges too. Some critics dismissed her story as exaggerated, accusing her of seeking attention. Others claimed she should move on and stop dwelling on the past. But Maya refused to let negativity deter her. Instead, she leaned on the strength of her allies, the passengers who stood up for her, the strangers who defended her online, and the activists who joined her cause. One particularly moving moment came when Margaret, the retired judge who had intervened at the airport, reached out to collaborate. Together, they drafted a proposal for improved screening processes that prioritized fairness and transparency. Their recommendations included mandatory implicit bias training for airport staff, independent oversight committees to review complaints, and clearer guidelines for handling flight documents. As weeks turned into months, Maya's efforts began yielding tangible results. Airports across the country announced plans to implement new training programs for employees. Law enforcement agencies pledged to review their procedures to prevent similar incidents. And most importantly, countless individuals shared their own stories of discrimination, finding solace in knowing they weren't alone. Through it all, Maya remained grounded, drawing strength from the community she'd helped build. She often reflected on the day everything changed. The fear, the anger, the resilience, and reminded herself why she couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice and equality. Though the scars of that day would always linger, Maya found peace in knowing she had turned pain into purpose. Her story had sparked a conversation that refused to fade, one that challenged society to do better, be better, and ensured no one else would face the same injustice silently. Months after the incident, Maya's life had transformed in ways she never anticipated. What began as a humiliating ordeal at the airport had evolved into a powerful movement for change. Her name became synonymous with resilience and advocacy, inspiring countless others to speak out against racial profiling and systemic bias. But for Maya, the journey was about more than recognition. It was about creating lasting impact. One crisp autumn morning, Maya stood on stage at a national civil rights conference, her presence commanding yet humble. The auditorium was packed with activists, lawmakers, and everyday citizens eager to hear her speak. As she adjusted the microphone, she glanced out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others new, and felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who had joined her fight, turning a personal injustice into a collective call for reform. Change doesn't happen overnight. Maya began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. It takes courage, persistence, and unity. And today, I stand before you not just as someone who experienced discrimination, but as someone who believes deeply in our ability to create a better future. Her speech wove together her own story with the broader struggles faced by marginalized communities. She recounted the fear and frustration of being detained, the overwhelming support from strangers, and the determination that fueled her advocacy. But she also acknowledged the work still ahead. "We've made progress, yes, but we're far from done," she said firmly. "Every policy change, every training program, every conversation matters. We can't afford to lose momentum now." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached her, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and thanking her for giving them hope. One young woman, tears streaming down her face, hugged Maya tightly. "Your story made me realize I'm not alone," she whispered. "Thank you for standing up." Beyond the conferences and speeches, Maya's efforts extended into tangible action. The campaign she co-founded with Margaret gained widespread traction, partnering with airports, airlines, and government agencies to implement reforms. Implicit bias training became mandatory for security personnel, while independent oversight committees were established to review complaints of unfair treatment. Passengers now had access to clearer channels for reporting incidents, ensuring accountability remained a priority. Maya also worked tirelessly to amplify other voices. She launched a podcast titled Speaking Truth, where she interviewed individuals who had faced similar injustices. Each episode shed light on different aspects of systemic bias, from travel discrimination to workplace inequality, sparking conversations that reached listeners around the globe. Through storytelling, Maya reminded everyone that behind every statistic or headline was a human being with a story worth hearing. Despite her growing influence, Maya stayed true to her roots. She continued working as a corporate lawyer, balancing her professional commitments with her advocacy work. Colleagues often joked that she was everywhere at once, attending meetings, giving interviews, and drafting proposals late into the night. Yet Maya thrived under the pressure, driven by the knowledge that her efforts were making a difference. On quieter days, she reflected on how far she'd come. The memory of that chaotic day at the airport still lingered, but it no longer held the same sting. Instead, it served as a reminder of her strength and the power of community. She thought about Margaret, the college student with pink hair, the passengers who cheered her on, and the millions of strangers who rallied behind her online. They weren't just supporters, they were partners in the fight for justice. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, Maya scrolled through social media. A post caught her eye. A photo of a young black woman holding a sign that read, "Because of Maya, I know my voice matters." Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the ripple effect of her actions. This wasn't just about changing policies. It was about empowering people to believe in their own ability to spark change. In the end, Maya knew the battle against discrimination wouldn't end with her. There would always be new challenges, new systems to dismantle, and new voices to uplift. But she also knew something else. The momentum she'd helped create was unstoppable. By standing firm in the face of adversity, she had ignited a fire that would burn brightly for generations to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, Maya smiled softly to herself. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She had turned pain into